Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're talking about some of the reasons why I think that companies fail. So you could argue, or one sometimes argues, and hears people talking about the main reasons for companies failing being something like a catch-all thing, like poor management or poor decisions. But I want to go a little bit deeper on this video. I want to talk about the 5 reasons that I think that companies in the recent times and recent future are likely to go bust. And these are kind of specific decisions that people make. Number one, I think, is not raising enough capital. This is true of both listed firms and private firms, or indeed, a family business or a small business. Not getting enough capital, not being able to have enough in reserves to cater to COVID or to cater to the new economic reality of the squeezed middle and the lack of purchasing power of vast sections of society. This is pretty consistent in the UK, the US, Australia, Europe, around the world. So not raising enough capital to withstand some of those short-term and medium-term shocks. 2, poor capital management. What do I mean by that? Or the allocation of capital within businesses is a primary objective. If you do it well, the company grows. If you do it poorly, the company does not grow. And a lot of companies may have felt that over the last couple of years that capital was plentiful and never going to run out. Therefore, they may have poorly allocated capital in areas such as overhiring or developing projects or products which were too speculative in nature or didn't generate revenue or profit fast enough. So that's 2, poor capital management. And maybe even the place that I worked, Facebook, which later changed its name to Meta, maybe that was guilty of the second thing, which was poor capital management. 3, relying too much on one style of fundraising. So you might see this where a company has over-relied on a big fundraising partner, and without thinking through the diverse natures of funding, and maybe they've become too reliant on that. For example, Meatless Farm, huge business, not a small business, relatively large business. I think it was valued at 500 million pounds, something like that. And it relied quite a lot on a lead investor, which recently pulled out of investing, and it wasn't able to plug that gap. Other examples might be big VCs. If a company is reliant on VC funding, venture capital funding, it might be difficult to replace venture capital funding with bank funding or with angels, just because of the amount of money and the terms that a VC will invest on. It might be different from those other funding types. So I think that third thing, relying on too much one style of investment, whether it's angel investors or VCs or bank funding or whatever, I think that is a reason why companies at the moment might fail and continue to fail in the future. Number 4 is not being profitable early enough. Now, depending on where you are in the economic cycle, the resilience or the ability for funding partners and companies to survive without being profitable is dependent on where you are in that cycle. Early on in a cycle where funding is plentiful, outlooks are rosy, balance sheets are not being squeezed, venture financing is plentiful, angels are interested in investing, and the capital pie is growing. Companies can spend freely, and they can grow, and they can hire aggressively, and they can go into new markets and create new products and services, etc. And they can grow. Reid Hoffman, the ex-CEO of LinkedIn, called it blitzscaling. You can kind of grow without thinking about profitability in the initial stages. And this 4th thing, not being profitable enough early on, can mean that it kind of ties into all the other things. It's going to be harder to raise capital. It's going to be harder to save the company. It's going to be harder to pivot or change the operating model if you're not profitable. And you find this with some companies, the Revoluts of this world, the Monzos of this world. They're reliant on raising hundreds of millions, in some cases every year or every couple of years. And if their model doesn't change, or if they're if their funding partners dry up for any reason, because they're so much in debt, it could mean that their business is at risk of going bust. Don't quote me on this, because those businesses aren't, then they might not go under. But I just think it is a risk for a lot of companies when you're reliant on, you're not making a profit year on year, but you're still relying on other funding types, and maybe the growth isn't real growth when it's just revenue growth. So I think over the next few years, I think we'll see a shift, and companies that do well will be companies that are more profitable, are more able to raise capital, are more able to grow using their own resources. And I think companies that aren't able to make profit, they're going to have funding sources dry up, and they're going to go under, or they're going to rapidly decline. This actually happened to a company I worked for called Travelex. They had money plentiful, and then a raft of different issues came about. They overspent on consulting firms like Deloitte and a few others, and they overhired, and they went on to speculative projects. They weren't profitable enough, and they had to really. They also had some other things. I think they had like a fraud, a customer leak or something, and they had to really downscale the size of the business. And no company that is suffering some of the things that I've mentioned about in this video thus far is immune to that kind of right sizing of the business, if you like. And the fifth reason is over relying on the economic cycle. There's a combination of all of those factors, if you like, that overspending in a bullish market, not having enough capital because they've relied on times always being good. Some businesses are counter-cyclical or out of the cycle. A lot of businesses are cyclical, i.e. they follow the economic cycle. And if one over-invests at the top, when we go into a contractionary phase where the business, the economic world is declining, and business, at the family level, at the financial level of the individual and the family is declining, their share of wallet is going down, the purchasing power of the individual and the family is decreasing. That's where businesses that haven't thought about the economic cycle, haven't prepared for it, and not thinking long term, that's when they can suffer and go under as well. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it useful. Maybe you can start thinking about this when thinking about companies that you invest in. I know that my style of investment is I'm a growth investor. A percentage of my businesses the companies that I invest in will go bust because they're looking for growth. So it's not always in terms of the companies I invest in. It's not always. It's likely that some of these companies will go bust anyway, depending on your style of investment, depending on the style of companies that you invest in and the things that you can get involved in. You may not come across these, but if you do see companies, not raising enough, or allocating capital in a bad way, relying on too much one style of fundraising, not being profitable enough, or over relying on the economic cycle and not understanding how to pivot or change operations, reduce costs and whatnot in a poor economic cycle, then you might want to take heed and take the necessary action based on those insights. I hope you found this video useful. If you have, smash the like button and consider subscribing, consider sharing it with friends and family that you could potentially benefit from these kinds of videos. Subscribe. And if you want to learn more about different styles of investing, I do videos on property, on equities, on startup investing in startups, and angel investing as well. Remember that knowledge is power, especially the right kind of knowledge, and progress is everything. I'll see you guys in one of these upcoming videos. Take care. Cheers.